Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Gregg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And I got a special guest. Every guest is always special. Dr. Paul George, one of my heroes. If you don't know him, he is the self-employed resident historian of Miami and the greater South Florida. Also a Knoll. So, I'm not going to hold that against you.
Yeah, okay.
You look like you're enjoying the weather right now in South Florida.
It's fabulous, Greg. I think you and I are sharing something that most of the rest of the world would love to have today.
Yeah, I know. And but we won't reveal that secret because the more people here, the more traffic.
It'll be larger than Tokyo if we do. So
yeah. All right. So maybe some of you in the audience from Miami, South Florida, have realized that there's these amazing city tours, walks that Dr. George has been doing for, I think, 3 or 4 decades.
Yeah, the mid 1980s. So it's going on 4 decades, which is hard to imagine. That's 3 children and a wife ago. So it's a lot of things have happened during that time.
Yeah, and I think I've done maybe 30 to 40 of them. And I was a history major. So one of the few people born in Miami, born, bred, and I guess contaminated in Miami. So I've always loved going on your tours, and I wanted to get you on here to talk about all, the tours that are coming up, what you're doing. I know you teach courses on history at Miami Community College, and people might not know this, and they might want to know this.
Of course.
And I've always so thoroughly enjoyed listening to you.
Well,
so
thank you.
The first time I've actually been able to, besides asking all these archaic questions on your which I know you appreciate. All right, right now, before we even go into like what's going on, what are you teaching, or what the upcoming tours, because they're usually during the January to April time slot, due to the weather. But before we even get in this, you told me right now you're writing an article about the 1920s real estate boom in
Greater Miami and South Florida. Yes. And it's captivated me since I was a graduate student researching the topic of Miami history for my dissertation. I was at Florida State as a history major. And when I came across this material in the newspapers and city council minutes and what have you on the boom in the mid-20s, I said, this is fantastic. And even though I'd grown up here like you, I knew very little about the area's history. So this was, this tremendous revelation to me, and I never let it go. And I've explored this theme many times, both in lectures and in writing.
And where will this article appear?
This will appear on History Miami's blog. I taught at Miami-Dade College, Greg, for 26 years, retired 8 years ago, and got busier with History Miami than I'd ever been. I've been with History Miami since the 80s as a resident historian, and I continue to be. I just got busier as time went on. So they're setting up a blog, a site, and we're going to go with it. And I'm excited about this. It's just a lot of good stuff going on.
All right, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Where will it be published?
Right online, right on HistoryMiami.org, and you'll be able to pick it up there.
Excellent. All right, so that should be the next topic then. History Miami Museum. People that have lived here their entire life have never even heard about this place. Talk to us a little bit about History Miami and what you do with them.
Well, it was established at the outset of the 1940s, and one of the founding directors of it was George Merrick, who created Coral Gables. Merrick died in 1942, so I only had a very short time with it, but he planted the seeds for it. And as time went on, it began to, percolate in different ways, lectures. And when I came aboard in the 80s, it was tours and things of that nature. But meantime, we had a journal called Tequesta, which publishes every year. I've been editor for 30 years, publishes every year on a very broad array of topics. So you've got that academic arm to it. You've got exhibitions down there. You've got great research archives. They've got over 2 million images, many of which are digitalized. So, we're downtown. And it's interesting because we're in West Downtown, which was a no man's land since the expressway ripped through there in the mid-60s and displaced a lot of things and people. But now the area is beginning to boom. All this private investment in high rises all around it. So, things are getting busier, and, we're much more relevant now, I think, than we were to a lot of other people at times. But we've been the go-to institution in this community in terms of history from really the beginning. It's been low key because in many ways, history offerings until modern times were low key. It could be lectures by, an older professor who had all gray hair or what have you, and things of that nature. But now, we've broadened to have Culture Fest because we're recognizing the fact that so many groups comprise Greater Miami. We're very heavily involved in archaeology and some of the digs on both banks of the Miami River. So it's broadened tremendously. And for me, I've been conducting tours for them since the mid 80s, conducting talks with them since the mid 80s also. So it's been great. It's been a great relationship. It really has been. And of course, writing with them.
I'm going to circle back to your Miami-Dade Community College professor activity, and you say you retired, but I still see that I think you had some classes that you were lecturing in August of last year.
They're through HistoryMiami Museum, and so someone interested, and I would really advise people to think about this because it's a fantastic setup, would take those classes in the auditorium within our complex, which is at 101 West Flagler. It's that cultural center that was designed by Philip Johnson more than 40 years ago, and it opened, in the case of HistoryMiami, which was then called the Historical Association of Southern Florida, way too long of a term and title. It opened in the early 1980s, and so that's where we are. And those lectures will look at early Miami history, and sometimes we'll focus on topical elements like transportation and tourism or aviation or whatever, the variety of people here. And it's great because we get a large audience. It's live. During COVID, it was remote, and we had people from Madrid, Spain, tuning into it, which is really interesting. So we do that too. Those classes will begin in September. There's 4 or 5 of those on consecutive Tuesdays, I believe. They last for 2 hours, and it's great because I'm lecturing, but then we bring in a specialist in whatever the area is that we're focusing on as part of that lecture. It could be Miami transportation through the ages, for example. And we've got a lot of images to embellish that. Sometimes, if the weather's good, like we've done classes in the fall and the early part of each year, we've actually gone out in the neighborhood. We've done a Metro Mover tour. We visited Lummis Park, one of the oldest parks in Miami on the river. We've done the downtown walk. So it's a tremendous mix of offerings, and we cover a lot of stuff in those 2-hour classes.
Including architecture.
Including architecture, absolutely architecture. In fact, we had a class recently, a few months ago, where that was one of the areas. So I lectured on architecture, Miami architecture, for about 45 minutes, and we brought in a real live architect who's done a lot of designing in Miami. And, he approached it in a more technical way, but explained, the building elements and why and this and that. And it was really great.
Nice. And I don't want to move into like all the interesting MIMO, Art Deco, vernacular. And we'll save that for my next podcast with you. And all right. So, now that you threw in the downtown, I got to ask you a couple questions. I share space downtown on Flagler Street with your buddy, Tim Barquette, Dylan Barquette, Jim Soper. And first of all, yesterday I did with a little freebie thing. So they take you on their little route, their route in the golf cart. And they got us to the river, and I couldn't believe it. Faina residence. They're building. I mean, it's crazy what's going on.
It's booming on the river, Greg, and it hasn't boomed. The river's been a busy body of water. It's the 5th busiest port in the state of Florida. As of a handful of years ago, it's probably more so now, it was doing $4 billion a year in trade with the Dominican Republic, its biggest trade partner, largely because of fabrics being molded in the clothing coming from here to the Republic. Anyway, people have rediscovered the river, but you've had human beings living along that river for thousands of years, easily 3,500 years, probably longer. And we've gotten into archaeology in a big way in this community in the last 50 years. And now we're really beginning to understand better both banks of the river as you move toward the mouth, which flows in or out of Biscayne Bay. But the river is booming. There's a restaurant area. You can't imagine how many people are trying to pull permits for new construction on the river, residential, restaurants, whatever it might be. I mean, and I've always thought it was a natural. I've done a book on the river, Pictorial History of the Miami River. And I've always thought it was natural. Why don't we embrace our river? Well, now we are embracing our river.
It's unbelievable. I went to I'm sure I'm butchering the name, Casa Neos, Mediterranean on the river.
Oh,
Unbelievable.
that's the new place, right?
That's the new place.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's about 5 or 6 there now that are unbelievable.
I just could not believe what an experience. All right. So also on the river, I mean, I keep saying, I'm trying to focus on the topics that I had prepared for, but we just keep going on to all these other interesting things. When I was I went to Art Basel. My girlfriend's an artist, and I get swept up in all the Art Basel stuff.
That's
and
exactly.
So they have their little art newspaper, and they had an article about, George Perez, the related group, the Tequestas, and that property along the river.
Right.
So what do you know is going on with that?
Well, it's being developed. We're not, and we know that before development occurred in some parts of the property, the archaeologists like Robert Carr, who's a very reputable archaeologist, been doing archaeology in Miami for about 45 to 50 years. They got in, they retrieved a lot of fossils and artifacts. They haven't really, I think, unbared them for public consumption yet, but we know that fossils go back at least several thousand years, human fossils that they've found in small numbers. A deal has likely been worked out, and I'm just not privy to it enough, between the developer and the state and the city and HistoryMiami, where HistoryMiami will become the steward of a lot of the fossils and artifacts. But development moves forward on that site. It's rich. It's rich because it's where 2 bodies of water meet. And these were seafaring people. They were not agriculturists, but they're very sophisticated in terms of technology, despite the lack of agriculture. So it's just great. I'm doing a river tour with HistoryMiami, open to the public December 28th, an evening tour, a week plus from now. And I planned, there's so much, it's just overwhelming how much you can talk about the river, but I want to really focus heavily on both banks in terms of those at early indigenous history, to the best of our knowledge, because it's so riveting. See, the Miami thing was, and you grew up here, so you know the story, you're too young to have a history. You were only incorporated in the city of Miami in 1896. Miami Beach, you only incorporated in 1950. Hey, wait a minute. Archaeology has told us, going back to 1985-86 by the Charles Daring Estate, aka the Daring Estate, that humans were living on that site going back more than 10,000 years. We have fossilized remains of humans, test dated back. That's the 85-86 archaeology. That changed all of our calendars completely, that excavation. It's now in county property.
All right. So from what I understand about George Perez and the related group and what they're going to do, so they found Tequesta relics. It was the Tequesta Indian tribe that was living along the river.
Right.
And my understanding is that they're going to basically build over the relics, preserving the relics.
This is a beautiful, perfect storm, and I know they'll pull it off. I was going to say if and when they pull it off, I think they'll do it. This is what you do when you go to Europe. You can be in the middle of a city. I go to Valencia, Spain, where my wife hails from, and you can stand in the middle of a city in a building and look down through glass at layers of centuries that have gone before, indigenous people, the Moorish era, the period after liberation. It's just unbelievable. It's like a history book. And we've been really late to embrace it, but it's coming. And I laud the deal makers in that situation, because that way we can go there, bring children, bring school groups, whatever, to the place.
Yeah. Listen, I guess it's the best that we can do, to allow progress to occur.
Well, it's a dynamic place is the problem, Greg. We have the 3rd densest skyline in the country now after New York to Chicago. And everybody wants to develop and everybody wants to live here. Look at today. It's crazy.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Well, I just hope that all these big buildings don't sink into the, that's what I was reading. The other thing, going back to downtown, while I got you on here, you might be the only person that can answer this question. What is going on with Flagler Street? Okay.
Well, it's
and the Gusman.
Yeah, it's dismaying to me, because for the first time in its downtown was the center of everything through the 1950s. Suburbia began to pull people away and pull shoppers away, clearly by the 50s, but really accelerated in the 60s and thereafter. So the downtown remained busy through the end of the last century, but at night it was completely dead. Downtown in my youth, going back a half a century plus, you had movie theaters operating day and night, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was a fantastic area. So what the thing that downtown always needed, once the pull of suburbia took so many people away from center city neighborhoods, it needed a residential base. Ironically, it has a residential base today because of the high rises. It doesn't have the retail and entertainment to accommodate these people, not on the scale that's necessary. But the first thing we need as a building block was the residential base. We now have it. So if somebody could get their act together with Flagler Street and get that completed and get retailers back in there, you're going to have a dynamic neighborhood. Look at it this way. You got Brickell, one of the great foot traffic neighborhoods in the American South. You know, I keep that exclusive of places like New York. It'll never be New York. I was up there this past weekend. You can't imagine how active it is on those streets. Anyway, you've got Brickell. You got this big blank downtown. And then you got Miami World Center, which is north of downtown, which is beginning to boom now. It's a huge new development. Then you've got the whole Arts Center. Then you've got Wynwood. And then if you look west, you've got Little Havana. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So we're really beginning to redevelop our center city neighborhoods, which is really exciting to me. Yeah. We are waiting for Flagler Street to be completed. And once it is, it's going to take off.
What is stopping it? I mean, this is not, you're not talking about a 10-mile stretch of road. You're talking, you know, less than a mile of roadway that they've been working on for 10 years.
You're 100% right. First of all, they've changed contractors a few times. Secondly, they ran into bigger problems than they anticipated in terms of pipes and replacements and stuff like that. But it goes on forever. It just doesn't end. And, you know, I think in today's world, every great city has to have a vibrant downtown. You've got to have a center. And Brickell's dynamite, but it's not the center. The courthouse isn't in Brickell. You know, a lot of those great Art Deco jewels aren't in Brickell. They're downtown. Now, you asked about the Olympia Theater, a.k.a. Gusman. It's been lobbed back and forth between different city departments and what have you. Miami-Dade College, which is a wonderful steward, and I was there for 26 years, wonderful steward of historic buildings, wanted to make a move to become the steward for the building, but it didn't work out. I don't think the numbers were there because it was going to take a tremendous financial investment to restore it, to get it up to speed. It's an old building. It opened 99 years ago this past spring. So we need it. If that building goes, forget it. But I want to tell you how interesting history is. Back in 70, 71, a developer came along and said, hey, I want to buy this building, the Olympia Theater. It's not doing well anymore because people aren't really coming to movies downtown. They go to shopping centers with this free parking, blah, blah, blah. And apparently Maurice Gusman and other people like Mitchell Wilson, who was a friend of Maurice Gusman, and others heard about that. They said, this can't happen. So Gusman bought it. He hired the great Morris Lapidus, who designed the Fontainebleau in Lincoln Road, to do a restoration. And he did. It was quick and dirty. You know, it just, there wasn't a lot of funding for it, but it got it back on its feet. But in the last many years, as part of this downtown malaise and as part of the malaise in reconstructing that building, the Olympia Theater, nothing's happened there. Nothing. So I'm just disconsolate about it. This is a place where over one weekend, a Friday and Saturday in early August of '56, Elvis Presley performed 7 or 8 times.
Wow.
In concert. And I was a boy. It was a talk of the town, the absolute talk of the town.
That's amazing. What I would, you know, my parents, they've been here for many years, and when they were first dating, they would actually go see movies at Gusman. They used to
everybody did.
Yeah.
I as a boy, I went to the movie theater in Gusman too.
Yeah.
Then known as the Olympia, of course, but there were also other theaters though, Greg. There was a town in Paramount across the street. There was a Florida across the street. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
The town was the center of everything for us. And you had Bayfront Park, and you know, it was great.
What's the latest with the Grove Playhouse? Speaking of theaters.
It's once again, it's up for grabs. You've had the state move in at times, you've had the county move in, you've had the city move in, you've had private entities like the Actors Playhouse move in, and nothing has happened. It's been sitting dark now for more than 10 years. And it's really dampened and damaged that part of Coconut Grove. In fact, Coconut Grove is making a great comeback now. The foot traffic there is tremendous now for the first 10 years. But I'm telling you that the closing of that theater almost put that Coconut Grove down in terms of a destination for people for fun and activities.
Yeah. All right. I want to go one more circling back.
Sure.
Going back to your lecture series. You know, I saw that you were doing some stuff at the end of this year. Are you going to do stuff? Is there anything planned upcoming?
There is.
How do we find out?
Well, you go to the website, HistoryMiami.org, and you go to the website and just look at tours, for example, you know, listing there. For example, I mentioned the river tour already. In mid-January, I've got a Key Biscayne still spill boat tour. It takes you by those 6 existing homes. There used to be 27 there at its peak in 1960. I've got that coming up. We'll have later in the year, we'll have a downtown tour. We'll have an Art Deco tour. Just a lot of things. I would say stay tuned to that website, HistoryMiami.org, for information on all this stuff. The class they would love. They can reach me personally. I can give you my email address. It's real simple. It's one word, MiamiHistorian@gmail.com.
All right. So will there be lectures coming up? Do you know what the topics will be?
Well, there's a lot of exhibits coming up, exhibitions coming up, but my lectures, to the best of my knowledge, won't be delivered again until August, September. And it's in Miami history, but again, looking at transportation, looking at education, looking at the environment, you know, how unique we are living in the subtropics. And we'll bring in experts. So I'll lecture, we'll look at images, I'll explain them, and then the experts will get down to the nitty gritty.
All right. So one of the main things I wanted to discuss with you today were your tours that were coming up.
Yes.
And you've already kind of beat me to the punch. So December 28th, hope my producer better get on the stick here and get this episode released quickly. So that's going to be the Moon over Miami River Cruise.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it sails out of Bayside, I think around 6 or 7 p.m. You may have it there, Greg. I'm not sure of the time, but
I think it is 6 o'clock. Yeah.
6 o'clock. Yeah. And it's great because it's very alluring on that river at nighttime. And I will share with you something. About a year before COVID, we did the river tour. It was a hot night. It was like September. And on the tour was Senator Robert Graham, Bob Graham.
Nice.
So I handed the mic to him. We were stuck at the Brickell Bridge coming back. I said, Senator, we know you grew up in the Miami Lakes neighborhood before it was called Miami Lakes. What was it like? And he got that mic and he explained that Miami about 70 or 80 years ago. Beautiful.
That's amazing. He's one of my heroes too. We need more people like him.
Greg, he was a lovely guy. He was an intellectual, but never really held it over anybody. I mean, the man was brilliant, Harvard Law, etc. You would have never known it, but he was such a great guy. And I came to know him over the years.
Yeah.
And his wife, who's every bit as lovely as he. And so we grieved when he passed, even though he lived a good long life. But he was something else, I'll tell you. He was really something.
He really helped out with the environment here. I mean, we've always had struggles with the Everglade and development and all this. But
and then on an international level, he was a master with the Senate Intelligence Committee. I think he chaired it at one point. Yeah. And, you know, looking at the nation's security and all, Bob Graham was one of the driving forces with that whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, well, boy, you know, time goes on, all these memories. All right, next tour, from what I see, is January 25th. That's going to be in the daytime. Stiltsville, you mentioned that. So give us a tease. I know you said there were 6 properties in Key Biscayne.
Well, I'm going to tell you that's one of the 2 most popular tours that I conduct. We're going back 40 years now. The other being the Miami River Tour. So these are the 2 most popular, coming up 2 in a row. And what we do is we sail from Bayside, across the bay. I'm talking about the harbor. I'm talking about the mouth of the river, talking about the Rickenbacker Causeway, talking about Biscayne National Park. And then suddenly we enter the Biscayne Channel, dug by Henry Flagler in 1897, and we're in Stiltsville. Sadly, one building went up in flames. I mean, 4 years since January, so we've gone from 7 to 6. But Stiltsville was a fishing place. It was a party place. It was a family place at its peak. In 1964, Hurricane Donna wrecked it. There were 27 structures, 4 of which were clubs, and some outrageous behavior. And the rest were sort of families or groups. A lot of attorneys, for example, sort of co-owned these places. And they were sort of, they ran on their own. The state didn't bother them at that point. The city didn't bother them. Nobody had jurisdiction, it seemed, at that time. So a lot of skullduggery went on there, but it was a great place.
Yeah, that's a great tour. I mean, the stories are unbelievable. And people, listen, if you've like moved here from New York or the North, and you've been here for a couple of years, enjoying the weather, and you just think that this is just, people going out and sunning themselves, you got to go on some of these tours and hear what was going on in Stiltsville over the decades. Just great stuff. I mean, you couldn't make that stuff up.
No, not at all. Not at all.
All right, the third tour is, from what I've seen on the site,
Sure.
February 1st, Sip of History, Stories of Resistance from Black Miami.
Yes, and am I narrating that? Because I haven't even looked at it.
Oh boy, maybe. I don't. I mean, I just pulled it off the website, so I thought you would know. But all right,
I've done tours of Overtown. I've done ethnicity tours. I used to call, there's one tour I did by bus, The Many Faces of Miami. We'd look at the Black Bahamian Grove, look at Liberty City, look at Overtown, but also look at Little Haiti, look at the Puerto Rican impact in Wynwood before Wynwood became what it is today. I mean, it was go to Alapata for the Dominican feel. It was an unbelievable, it was Miami, all within the city limits of Miami. So I'm not sure if this is, me or not, but I know there's a downtown tour coming up, I believe in April.
all right.
And we do that because my first tour of History of Miami in terms of a public tour was a downtown tour way back in the mid 80s. So we kind of remember it each year. It was in April. And so we bring that back. But downtown continues to have more history, more archaeology, and more architecture than any other tour that I do. There's
Nice.
so much in downtown because it was all centered there, going back to the Tequesta Indians. That's where their encampments were in that area.
The high ground.
Absolutely high ground. Had to be, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I read in the paper today that I think there's some major federal funding that it was basically delivered to Overtown, I think, to help, further develop it. I mean, they've made some inroads, but they've still got ways to go.
There's huge investments in there, partly because of the Bright Line opening up and kind of flourishing. Tremendous investments in Overtown. You wouldn't imagine the way it is today. The physical development in the last X number of years has been phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's nice. It's actually nice to see. I mean, as somebody that grew up here, there was like no Wynwood, there was no design district. When I grew up here, South Beach was just like old people, poor people. I never even wanted to go there. I used to go there to see my grandfather, and he would take me to professional wrestling at the convention center, and that was my, Dusty Rhodes and all that, Gordon Sully. I wouldn't say they were the good old days, but they were interesting to say.
They were the old days. They were the old days.
The old days. All right, and then the fourth tour that I see on it, and hopefully you're going to be involved in this one, South Beach History and Art Deco. Are you doing?
Oh, of course. That's one of my cups of tea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be a great one. We go up and down Ocean Drive, Collins Avenue, Washington, look at design styles, talk about histories, look at Lummis Park. It's just so much history and architecture on that tour.
Yeah, love it. I love the architecture, the old hotels that are still around. Their floors in the hotels are spectacular.
I was going to say, it's not only the exterior, it's the interiors too.
Yeah,
that are outrageous.
And I'm happy to see that they've effectively revived some of these hotels, and people are going to them. That's
they are in a very big way.
All right. So we've covered all my topics. I know that you've written 16 books, and I think the Jewish community is considering issuing you an honorary role because some of your books cover like the Jewish parts of Miami. So I mean, before we started our talk today, you mentioned a few of them. Temple Emmanuel. What else have you written about?
A couple books on Mount Sinai. It's history. Miami Jewish Home and Hospital for the Aged, and a pictorial history that's come out in the last not even a year, called Jewish Miami Beach, which goes back to the beginnings, that is the early 1900s, with the Weiss family who founded Joe's, eventually became Joe Stonecrab, all the way into the recent past. And that's been fun. That was a fun thing to do. It's been great. I'm a lucky guy who gets to do this stuff.
I know. We love you, man. You got to keep it up. So, all right, I'm going to end on this note. Give me your 2 favorite restaurants. You can go one old school and one new.
Well, and you're so right the way you picked that out, because my 2 favorite restaurants are Joe Stone Crab and Prime 112.
Nice.
And Prime 112 reminds me of a noisy New York bar restaurant. And that's one of the things that's so alluring. Incidentally, that building was the old Browns Hotel built in 1915. It's one of the oldest buildings on the beach. I don't think there's more than a couple of buildings that might predate that by a year or so. But just, I just love both of those places.
So I'm going to end this on this little personal note.
Yeah.
I got divorced, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, and I can't cook, okay, amongst many other things that I can't do. So my parents are like, well, where are you going to move? Well, you sold the house. And I'm like, well, I guess I got to move somewhere close to restaurants. So I actually made a life decision and moved right next door to Joe Stone Crabs.
Oh my God. Are you there?
Mainly for the takeaway. Their takeaway,
That place fantastic. We go to the takeaway a good bit.
Yeah.
So are you still living in that area?
I'm still living in that area. Yep. Yes,
To think where that was 40 years ago, south of 5th Street, to see where it is.
Oh my God.
It's amazing. Amazing.
Don't tell anybody about it though.
Yeah, exactly. I hear that you're a big Noche Buena fan too. Is that right?
Yeah. We're gonna, slip on into.
Well, I think I'm going to see you at one of these Noche Buenas pretty soon.
Yeah. We can't reveal exactly who's doing it because
No.
they try to keep it, under wraps or whatever.
Yeah.
But I will see you then.
Looking forward to it.
And I'm looking forward to all your tours and the article you're writing today. And
Yes.
everything else.
Well, thank you. I wanted to mention one other thing, and I'll let you go. And that is that I've been conducting free Little Havana tours for more than 20 years for a Cultural Friday. We meet at the Tower Theater every 3rd Friday of the month at 7 p.m. I do 12 different tours of the neighborhood, free to the public. I started that in 2002. We're meeting this Friday night, Tower Theater. Maybe the engineer is handling this, might not be able to get to this in time, but it's every 3rd Friday. Tower, 7 p.m., different parts of this very rich Shenandoah Little Havana neighborhood.
Nice. And that's where my mother actually grew up also. Another shout out to my mother.
What's interesting, Greg? That was a heavily Jewish neighborhood into the 1950s and beyond.
Yeah.
There were 3 synagogues in a finite area in that neighborhood at that time.
Which were?
Well, there was it was called Bethel. There was Beth David.
Yeah.
Jewish congregation down on 11th Street and Southwest 12th Avenue.
Nice. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to see you in a few nights, hopefully.
Right.
Is there a website for the 3rd Friday night in Little Haiti tour?
Yeah, there is. It's a Little Havana. It's a Viernes Culturales, Viernes Culturales, Culturales. Yeah. And I think tour goers will love the thing, Greg, because it's a twilight. The area is just filled with history. What if I told you that 2 of the men partly responsible for dropping the atomic bombs over Japan spent time in their youth in the Little Havana neighborhood? And we go by the home of one of them, a man named Paul Tibbets Jr., who flew the Enola Gay, named for his mother, that dropped the atomic bomb over Hiroshima. I mean, they grew up in the neighborhood.
Wow.
So it's got all this hidden history to it.
Yeah. Listen, folks, you moved into South Florida for the weather. Maybe you came here for the Miami Dolphins. God only knows why you would do that. But there's so much history. I know people are like, oh, Miami, it's only been around 100+ years or whatever. But there is amazing history. And this is the source. And if you miss out on his tours or his lectures or his books, then I can't do anything about it. All right. I'm doing what I can to make this, get the wheels moving here. But yeah. Dr. George, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It really was. So good talking with you. And I hope to see you soon on one of these tours.
I will. And hopefully Noche Buena, but we'll definitely on the tours. Okay.
And Noche Buena too. Can you imagine 2 Noche Buenas in one night?
One night. I know. But I think we have to work on our Hispanic accents. I wouldn't say Spanish accents.
Yeah, I have no excuse. My wife is from Valencia, Spain, and I still haven't picked it up right. So I have no excuse at all.
Yeah, I don't either. All right. All right. That'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. You can help my program out by subscribing and rating and reviewing and telling me how much you love Dr. George. That would be a nice option. But that'll do it for this episode, folks. So stay cool out there. All right.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.